Hello, and welcome. It's time for the occasional video in English. Yes, it's been a while. I couldn't resist it. I had to make a video response to a lovely video called On Having a Tarot Deck Collection by Imogen at Sapling Tarot. I love their channel. You should check it out, definitely. But I especially loved this video, and I love that it generated a lot of video responses. What I especially love about it is that it was more a reflexive, tender invitation to think about our collections, tarot and oracle decks collection, and share it with the community. And there was not this consumerist edge that there often is in this kind of video, so I really liked it. A little word for the usual audience of my channel, French speakers. Hey, sorry, this one is in English. Yes, the algorithm are gonna hate me for it, but I do love those community TarotTube tags, and I know that if I do the video in French, even with the automatic subtitles translation, it can sometimes be hard to follow, so I wanted to do this one in English. I thought there will probably be something on my blog, like a summary with bullet points in French or something. I'm afraid it's going to be a quite long video because I want to go into details. So let's go. The first question is, how long have you been collecting decks? Well, for that I need to tell you my little tarot story because it's gonna make sense of what we're gonna explain later. Back in 2015, I went to Paris to meet Parisian friends and go to the Niki de Saint Phalle exhibition at the Grand Palais. It was very fancy, such a huge exhibition. If you don't know anything about Niki de Saint Phalle, it's a major feminist artist of the second part of the 20th century. She's Franco-American, quite upper class, very traumatized. She worked a lot on her trauma through her work, also on patriarchal violence, and she was also involved in supporting the civic rights movement and other causes in sometimes a quite white saviorist way. Yeah, you'll see. You'll see what I mean. So I went to this exhibition, and what I loved most of all were the big statues of what she calls les nanas. So les nanas are like huge women silhouettes dancing. They are gigantic, they are colorful, and they are so fat, and it's so nice to have some fat representation. Of course, then there is this always problematic side to Niki de Saint Phalle, which is like, ooh, dancing fat women evoke for her liberation and women not shrinking themselves. And of course it's important, but it's always like the kind of mainstream feminism taking minorities within their, within feminism, the margins of feminism, and using them as kind of their inspiration point. But actually she never worked with fat women that I know of, and it's more of a fetishization of the fat body, and also the fat black body, I have to say, in her work. That's sometimes really troubling. However, there are also inspiring elements, and to see those fats dancing nanas, the movement, the joy, and anyway, women not afraid to taking up space is always so important. And even though there was the fat lib movement already when she started doing that, the Fat Underground Manifesto or major things like that were already out there. There's no reason actually to talk about fat people without fat people, but yeah, it's art, and so the fat body is a metaphor for something else. Whatever, because I have to say I really loved it. So I was amazed, moved to tears, and in, I think, the last room of the exhibition, there is something about the Tarot Garden. She has a huge Tarot Garden in Tuscany, where she has major sculptures, but like they are actually buildings. Some of them are fountains or things like that, for the 22 major arcana archetypes. Beforehand, I had no inclination towards tarot or oracle or cartomancy in general. For me, it was just prediction, and to be quite honest, even more than 10 years later, I still have no interest whatsoever in predicting. My tarot is very mystical and divinatory, but divinatory for me means communing with the invisible and making the invisible visible, but it doesn't mean predicting the future. It's not my thing. I don't care. I don't want to know the future. I want to live in the present. I think it's quite fear-inducing, or it just doesn't help me to focus on what might or might not happen. So I had this kind of cliches about fortune telling, and it was just not for me. I had no interest in that whatsoever. Then I go there and I hear someone talk about tarot in a way that's more of a psychoanalytical tool. Okay, there's a problem with that. She was very Jungian, but it's opened up something in me like, oh, okay, so tarot can be like a mirror, a way of exploring the soul, like diving into the psyche, the subconscious. And I don't practice this kind of tarot nowadays, or mostly not this kind of tarot nowadays, but it was still something that instilled something, a curiosity, and it opened my mind. So went on with my life, and more than a year afterwards, I couldn't keep it. I needed to learn more about tarot. I needed to investigate and ask a friend, what would you suggest? I have no clue where to start. It's confusing. I don't know anything about tarot. And she told me, but you need to read the Tarot de Marseille, and in the Tarot de Marseille, you need to pick up Jodorowsky's deck, Alejandro Jodorowsky. So here I am, feminist, activist, queer, activist and everything, and I open this book of Jodorowsky, and everything is like heterosexist bullshit. And psychoanalytical, but like very, very like... He seemed to only be focused on maintaining the status quo. So I have this deck. I don't really like the aesthetic of the Tarot de Marseille, first of all, and then, okay, it appears to be working, but this book, oh my gosh. So at this point, it comes to my mind that the only thing that I could possibly do is Google tarot feminist, tarot queer. There we go. I find out about literary tarot, which used to be a very big, not only a shop, it still exists as a shop, but back then Beth Maiden, who was the owner back then, had a very huge community blog, and she had been sharing for years on her blog about tarot, and it opened up something in me like magic. But then why this whole big story? Because I couldn't go into tarot without searching for decks and writings and way to interpret the cards and ways to analyze the cards and to understand them that would be feminist. Because to be non-patriarchal is to be feminist in such a heterosexist world, as is mainstream tarot, was mainstream tarot 10 years ago, especially in French, very influenced by Jodorowsky and the likes of him. Still to this day, by the way, in the Tarot de Marseille communities in French, gosh, very conservative, like. And so my quest, and I've been on this quest ever since. And you have to remember that back in 2016, there wasn't a lot of explicitly queer tarot decks. It was a time when Kellyanne Maddox had this tag at first about tarot is so white. And there was a conversation about that. The conversation was started, and there were some major people of color tarot reader having conversations about that as well. Fat people, we were there as well, but it was only just starting. Cassandra Snow had started their series on queering the tarot, on literary tarot. It's now a book, but it was still like babbling, assez balbutiement. So long story short, back in 2016, I started looking for decks that were a bit more lesbian friendly, a bit less white, less thin, and so on. That's why I started collecting decks, because there were so little of them back then. So I started with the Wild Unknown Tarot, which is nowhere in those categories. Was back then one of the very few decks where we didn't have stereotypical straight, white, slender figures on the cards. So it was for me, when working with visuals, I need to be able to say, oh, I can see myself and I can see my communities in that. Somehow it was okay starting with the Wild Unknown Tarot, because I really love non-people decks, actually. Not as a by default, but because I love those decks as well. But I also wanted to see people. And so in 2016, I had the Thea's Tarot, the old lesbian feminist tarot deck from the 80s. Was really happy with that. And we were expecting more decks, like Next World Tarot was being created, Slow Holder Tarot was being created. There was the Collective Tarot that I think was already out of print at that time, and a curation of more inclusive tarot decks on the Little Red Tarot website back then. It was before Brexit, so we could buy decks in the UK, which is basically impossible right now. So anyway, I was very committed to start learning tarot with only one deck, and I could refer to the Rider-Waite-Smith online if I needed to just compare the visuals and everything. So I really learned with the Wild Unknown, quickly had the Thea's Tarot, and might have had bought couple of decks, like mainstream mass market decks. But it's only when we started having indie self-published decks or game changers, such as Next World Tarot arrived in my collection late 2017, Slow Holder Tarot 2017 as well, I think, that I was on this quest, and that's mostly what was driving me, and supporting artists and independent artists by then was what I really wanted to do. And I started my blog quite early after I started learning tarot, because I wanted to share my learning process. You have to remember, it was another time, 2016. It appears to be so far away, 10 years ago. Then at the beginning of 2017, I think, I started my YouTube channel, because it seemed fun, and watching Kellyanne Maddox online was such an inspiration that I thought maybe I can try to provide an analysis there. And sometimes it's easier to, to explain things while talking. It's more lively than when you have to try and come up with the structure in a text. My channel, my blogs, and later on maybe my Instagram account were all the more reasons why I wanted to have a collection that was representative of more diversity. And building a collection around more inclusive, quote-unquote, decks was really important for me. I have made a series of videos on criticizing the notion of inclusivity in decks. If you want to watch them, the videos are available in English as well. But anyway, all that probably took off as well when I started writing for the Little Red Tarot website. I had a Fat Tarot column, and so I wanted to explore more. I wanted to talk about fatness in decks and sort of deconstruct, invite, propose something else. And for my column, it was important as well. At first, when I started learning tarot, I also did read quite a lot in feminist, queer, lesbian spaces in Brussels. Back then I used to live in Brussels when it was still affordable to live in the big city. Sometimes I had invites to go to some feminist festival to read tarot and everything. I had to stop that because it's honestly too difficult with my chronic illness, but I also wanted to be able to give workshops and readings. That was my dream. But basically it has always been very complicated for me, but I wanted to do that because I wanted to share my love of tarot within my communities. And I was working in a feminist non-profit, and I was quite active back then. Started to be less active, but I had been active for quite a few years in activist queer circles in Brussels, and I just wanted to give that to my community back then. I would good. I don't know if I still have a community right now, and I do miss that dearly. Somehow it's complicated. Yeah, so this was just important for me to go places and show the diversity, like the numinous tarot, next world tarot, to show that they were there and that we had a place in tarot. And if we could see ourselves in those cards, it was an invitation. It was easier to get to it rather than all the charlatans. How do you call that? Like scammers. I mean, there were a lot of people reading Tarot de Marseille that were quite preying on people's credulity or misery, sometimes I felt like, and it was also nice to introduce more people in French to the Rider-Waite-Smith system and how to use it and how we could expand more the representations with the Waite-Smith as a starting point somehow. So yeah, one of the reasons why I started Collected then was my channel here, and really the desire to bring this conversation into my community and to show that other decks were possible. Basically, it didn't make any sense to me to be reading tarot to other people with non-inclusive decks, exclusive decks that were actively excluding people from the representation and the narrative and everything. And I know that it's not just about the cards, it's also about the discourse we build around it, and we can perfectly interpret tarot reading in a queer way, even if the cards are like basic Rider-Waite-Smith. But I like the visual and I like art, and I really wanted to bring them into my collection at some point because they were there. I don't only have inclusive quote unquote decks in my collection, but mostly actually, or meeting my other interests like mysticism, animism, working with the land, plants, and history, I guess. I like to have historic decks in my collection, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to move on. What kind of collection do you have? Minimal, utilitarian, aesthetic, historical, etc. I think I have a rather eclectic collection. I'd like to think that it's carefully curated. Eclectic, colorful, queer, feminist, inclusive, so taking also into consideration that there must be diversity and representativity of various bodies and situations, and trying also to have diversity in the deck creators and not just like white people. Something that's really important for me is to have decks that broaden the scope of tarot, that don't decks that just don't say, oh, tarot is universal, you know, but look at those people who are still just basically all the same. And I want decks that are like, well, if we want to make tarot interesting and really quite universal, I don't see really the point of making anything universal, but whatever, then we must have more voices, bring more ways to interpret, just deconstruct, criticize, come up with new visions, being emergent about the way we see tarot, bring activism into tarot as well, whenever possible. So I have this kind of vibe in my collection, I think. Also, I'm a historian and I like to have old feminist decks that are like quite problematic, but they're still important for me to have and see. I have historical decks, like I see here the Visconti Tarot, the top deck, of course, the Rider-Waite-Smith. They're here, but they're just here for like, yeah, basic study decks, I would say. What kind of collection do you have? Yeah, there are many threads in my collections, weaving my collections in what it is, but I think the most important, like the red thread in that, is inclusive decks. Inclusive. Are you a completionist? Okay, this question relates to whether if there's a series of decks going on or something, I want to have it all. No, quite the contrary, actually. I hate it when people start with one deck and then are like, oh, but there's going to be more. oh, and you think it's over, but no. And you think this was sold out, but no, you can have it, but it's more expensive. Things like that. I hate all of this marketing. I feel like people are making a fool out of me. No, no, completing a series is never something that is an end goal for me. The deck needs to make sense in my collection. And Imogen, they took the Seasons of the Witch series as an example. I have all the decks, oracle decks, that are illustrated by Tiana Lukovic, and I really love them. So it makes sense because I use them a lot. I love their energy, I love the colors, I love the vibrancy. I really like them. There was nothing for me in those decks. I have a lot of things against them, but they work wonder for me. They're really cool to have in my collection. So voila, there they are, and they're staying there. But for example, I was very happy with the oracle decks, and when I started seeing pictures of the tarot deck, the first one, the winter one, I was like, no, not for me, no, definitely not. I don't like this and this and that, and blah, blah, blah. I was like quite grumpy about it. So I was quite decided I wouldn't have it in my collection. I'm not a completionist, I didn't need it, I was very happy with the oracle decks, but something wasn't just not for me in the tarot decks. Or so I thought, because well, it kept coming back, and I eventually bought it for Christmas last year. I adore it. Now I'm sure I want the 4 of them, just because as a witch and someone who works with the wheel of the year and works with the land and works with the seasons, but also with the inner seasons, it's just magical. But I will always try and see pictures of the cards, walkthroughs or partial walkthroughs online before buying the 3 next decks, because it's not like, oh, I have signed an engagement to buy it blindly, whatever is inside. So definitely not. Like, for example, I love the Fifth Spirit Tarot. I would like to have the Gay Marseille Tarot in my collection at some point because inclusive and queer. But hey, it's super expensive. I can't just trade indie decks against me writing like I used to do with Beth Maiden over at Little Red Tarot. It's not in my budget, so I'm not gonna complete that. Sorry, not sorry. It's not gonna happen. Maybe someday if I find it in a second-hand bookshop by a miracle of some gods, but otherwise no, it's not gonna happen. And also, just because the deck is inclusive, I think of, for example, Fat Fox Tarot deck. I loved it. I was happy to buy it and to show it online. Then I realized that I wasn't matching. Some cards really weren't a match for me. They were quite disturbing. I really didn't like it. Problem with collective decks. I got rid of them. Even if there's super cool queer or feminist deck, if I don't use it, I declutter. It's a further question, but I see no obligation to carry on anything with a deck just because they fit a function in my collection. Like, and I have regrets about it. Sometimes money is an issue and I have to get rid of some of my decks. And the Modern Witch I didn't keep. I don't regret this one, but this might hurt. Yeah, I don't know, those decks, they really had something and I couldn't keep them. I regret that, but this goes to say that I don't try to have everything in the collection, or like the Gentle Tarot. It's an absolutely beautiful deck and I love the aesthetic, I love the images, but I just can't have all the oracles and so on that Marie in the Sky does. It doesn't make sense for me. I love them, but I'm not trying to have a big, amazing collection. I want things that have a point. Whether because I'm going to use them or because they are historic or study decks. Well, actually, I wish I was rich enough to have plenty of decks in my collection and never having to declutter, I think. But I'm not. And last time I had to declutter. It's a further question, but I'm answering it now because we were living in a flat without any heating system. We lived there for a year, and I felt like my decks were in danger there with the humidity levels, and also money-wise it was complicated. So I had to make some room, and I'm looking at my shelves right now, you know, my tarot deck, my little library of decks there, and I'm happy. I mostly don't have regret. I want my collection to live, and there's some balance to be found there. How do I organize my decks? But very simple. They are in beautiful tarot bags that my butch makes for me, hand sews for me. With my EDS, I'm not always I can be very clumsy, and to be taking decks out of a bag rather than out of a box makes things easier. And also I tend to have things everywhere. I'm very messy, so the easier the better. So bags are easy. And then I do organize them by color because it's pretty. I'm a Virgo rising. I love color coding. I love a rainbow. It's a visual paradise for me. So I have 3 shelves ahead in front of me. You're gonna see it in the video. Those are the decks that I'm not using most at the moment. For the decks that I use the most, I do have, like so many of us, an IKEA trolley. So now I do boycott IKEA because the planet and the trees, but I only buy secondhand. But I did buy this one new. It's very useful. I have a basket with the decks that I use, but basically it's overflowing with decks everywhere on the shelf there and there as well. Well, I have decks everywhere. There's probably 15 decks here that I use more at the moment. Like, I would change it. I could probably speak more about how I do rotate my collection between what is on the shelves, what is on my trolley here. Trolley, my dessert. But maybe for another video, because it's probably already long enough. The next question is, what is your favorite thing about your collection? I would first of all say that I'm very happy to have a rather queer collection. So it's very comforting to know that whatever I'm going through, I can always grab a deck in my collection and it's gonna be supportive, it's going to help me. There is a deck for every mood, for every need, for every situation. There's always something that I can reach for and that is going to help me. I feel like I have a quite supportive collection, and that is pretty important. And yeah, it's supposed to be one favorite thing, but I'm gonna come up with something else. I like that my collection is in movement, constantly moving. So I'm not keeping things that I'm not using or that don't make sense in my collection. Even though I try not to spend a lot of money on decks, they are not always, but they are frequently, every now and then, every couple of months, there's a deck coming in. And I like this movement because it also means that I use most of my decks. And it's an active collection. It's not like it's frozen in time and they're too pretty, they're too precious to be used. I don't feel like I need to take any precaution to use my decks. I'm not very fancy about that. I like it to be quite simple, dirty if it needs to be dirty. I want my decks to be able to go in the woods and in the mud with me if they need to. And I like that. I like that it's alive. It's, yeah, because also as an animist, I do feel the life. I do feel the anima, I do feel the soul in most of my decks, and I like that. And I like to have a connection that I am able to connect with, to be in a relationship with. It's definitely very important. I have quite a few videos on that in French if you're interested. Next question is my least favorite thing or something I'd like to improve about my collection. Still looking at my shelf there. Right now what comes to mind is I'm pretty sad that I'm not able to afford indie self-published decks anymore, that I have to go for mass market because I'm very bad at saving. So I cannot say, oh, I'm gonna take 10 euros every month and after 6 or 7 months I'm able to buy an indie deck. can possibly do that. Besides, with everything going on worldwide with the customs and everything, it's getting more and more complicated to get really cool decks made in the US or even in the UK, in Belgium. Like, for example, I think of the Sapphic Tarot or things like that. There are a couple of cool lesbian decks that I can't have because, one, they're expensive, two, they are doubly expensive because I would have to pay customs fees. I don't know how to improve that, but it would make my collection feel happier, more conscious, more political, more rooted in reality if I had the possibility to add more decks that are independently created, that are more badass, that are taking more like the environmental impact into consideration than most mass markets decks and publishing houses. Also now with a big industrial book or something, most of the mass market decks are related, like for example Hachette in France. The owner is a far-right activist. I mean, it's a problem. We need more independence. I do buy mass market decks, but I wish I could do more to support indie artists. Yeah, it's something that's so important to me, and if I had to improve my collection, it would be on that account. Before answering the next question, let me address the elephant in the room. Yeah, I started recording the video last week, and this week I'm just wearing another wig. Also, I'm very red and I feel very self-conscious about that right now, but it is what it is. My mast cell activation syndrome is clearly playing tricks on me, as it usually does. Now that this is out of the way, let's go on with the next question. What is the biggest category in your collection? And by that, Imogen meant tarot, oracle decks, Lenormand decks, and so on. The biggest category has to be tarot deck. I am first and foremost a tarot fan. This is where my heart leads me. So I have about 49 tarot decks in my collection. It's a number. It's relatively small compared to what a lot of people on YouTube have, but it's quite a lot compared to what's like normal people have, or people who are not collectors consider a decent amount. So I mean, I would say it's a mid-sized collection, but still I have about 50 tarot decks. I obviously don't keep them all. There's always movement in my collection, as we've seen and as we are gonna see further along the way. So that's the first one. Then we have the mid category, which is oracle deck. I have about 36 oracle decks if I'm not mistaken. My way of counting is always evolving, but well, that's not a perfect number, but that's about it. And the smallest category is Lenormand deck. I have 5 grand and petit Lenormand decks. I don't read Lenormand actually, because traditional cartomancy is not for me. I tried to read Lenormand in a more intuitive way, but it didn't work for me either. At least 3 out of the 5 Lenormand decks that I have are like great finds that I made on the great finds that I made on flea markets. Some of them very, very cheap compared to their historical value. Others, well, were quite expensive, but I don't know, sometimes I act stupid. We're gonna stop there because I could think of other ways to categorize my collection. We have the question, do you have a holy grail in your collection? There are several ways to answer this question. The first one is, do I have like a soul deck? Like a lot of people on TarotTube would tend to speak of soul decks or things like that. I don't believe in such things. It feels quite dangerous to, well, it's not my language, like twin flames, soul decks, come on. I mean, it's not for me. So I don't have such a deck. I have a lot of decks that I adore above the rest of the decks of my collection, but nothing like, ooh, Destiny. Oh, anything like that. Oh, I don't think. And I don't want to idealize anybody or anything that way in my life, so I'm not gonna do that. I have a deck that's a unicorn deck for a lot of people. It's my Slow Roller Tarot, because it went out of print really quickly, and a lot of us were expecting a reprint or were waiting for it to be available in Europe, which it actually never was. So I was very, very happy that a friend gifted it to me, and she ordered from the US. So because it's so rare, it's like the unicorn deck for a lot of people, and I can consider that maybe it's the rarest and it's a more precious deck in my collection. Yet I'm not gonna be very precious about it just because it is. I handle it like I would any other deck. I'm not very cautious. I really like it, and it's a holy grail deck because it's a unicorn deck for so many people, and it's rare and hard to find. That said, I don't have decks that I idealize, I consider as above the rest of my collection, or that I need to treat in a special way. But decks that are indie, out of print, and so on, tend to have a more special place in my collection just because of the fact that they are rare. But I try to use them and treat them the same way I would any other deck, because if I need to be considerate and watch after every single one of my movement and everything, then I will not be comfortable with the deck. I mean, I have HEDS, my proprioception is a big issue, so I'm always susceptible to do some damage to a deck, and that's what it is. I can fight it. It's gonna be part of my relationship with the deck. So I try to treat them all equally. Do you ever wish your collection was bigger, smaller, or is it complete? I try to always be satisfied with my collection as it is. I don't want to be forced or feel forced or force myself to keep on adding. Most of the time I really am just satisfied. Okay, I'm happy with what I have, no problem. And then there are some moments when I'm like, oh, I can identify a gap, or my practice has shifted and I want more witchy decks. And I can see that there are now more and more decks available that reflect more my witchcraft practice, for example. So then I might try and add something in my collection. And sometimes decks that I was very happy with, I have a feeling of overload, or I don't practice with them anymore, and I might get rid of many of them. But it comes and goes. There are no rules. It often is so that I spend a lot of time during the year feeling very satisfied and very, very at peace with my collection, like I don't want anything more, everything is great. And then I have those moments during the year where I'm like, oh, I must have a new deck or something like that. Usually it's around Christmas or around our birthday month, and I will then be gravitating towards adding more decks to my collection. I don't have a one in, one out rule, but I try to keep my collection manageable. I try to keep it so that I have a relationship with my decks, whether I use them or they are historical or they are study decks. I'm a maximalist in general, and I can consider that I have quite a lot of tarot decks and oracle decks, but I don't want it to become overwhelming. Or I want the relationship with my decks, with tarot, with my tarot practice, and tarot practice being a way of getting back, getting centered, coming home to myself, listening to my guides and allies, and so on and so forth. My collection needs to feel complete in that sense, I guess. It needs to feel complete. I would feel very bad if it felt incomplete. And maybe the feeling of something being incomplete, that was what drove me to start collecting tarot decks. But then at some point there were many more inclusive, more queer, more everything decks out there, and I don't feel like I'm on a quest as much as I was before, so it feels very complete. But then if there are more decks with an animistic vibe, then I'm happy to bring them into my collection. Or if I start having a relationship with a deity or the spirit of the place, and I can feel that there's a vibe that I want to bring, something that would improve, or not improve, but add more depth to a relationship or to a practice, then I might add a tarot deck. And then yeah, that sometimes it's just a collector spirit that's in me, that's like, oh, another colorful deck, or another queer deck. Ooh, I might not use it, but I'd like to have it in my own hands. And then if at some point it needs to go, I need to give it to someone, to lend it to someone, I will. Okay. How often do you declutter your collection? Last time I did a big declutter was 2 years ago, when I was living in an unheated flat. So it was quite difficult to keep my decks in good conditions, and also often when I need to make a big declutter, let's be honest, is because I need the money. But then I picked quite a lot of decks I wanted to get out, but then I'm not in a rush. Like, I'm not on a Vinted or any other platform online where you would sell your decks. So sometimes I post just something on Instagram so that people know, or I let them go to my friends for just a couple of euros. It depends on the decks, but I never feel like I'm in a hurry to get them moved. Last time I did a declutter, I made a video, and I would say that half of the decks left me very soon afterwards, and then the rest, it took a while. There are 2 decks that went to a friend's when I sent her a parcel end December, and there are still a couple more that I'm willing to let go, find a new home for, but yeah, I'm in no hurry. There is a little like new agey local shop around here where the lady has a basket for the second-hand items. I try to get some of them out through that way, but let's be honest, people here don't appear to have well, it's not very new agey, let's say, my collection. And if people are new agey, we start to have a problem because they're not very inclined to buy my decks, I would say. Well, anyway, I am not feeling the need or the desire to declutter at the moment, but this can shift really quickly. I can at the moment be like, oh, I need more room, or I need space, or oh, there's a deck that I really want, but I don't have enough money for it, so I might sell something in order to let something come in, which was also the point of my last declutter, I guess. But at the moment, I'm really happy with all of the decks that I have. I have a feeling of completion, and the temptation, if I don't have any big money issue, would be to add some relevant decks every now and then, but not to get rid of more decks. This might change. We'll see. Do you ever get envious seeing other people's collection? No. No, but in general, I'm not an envious person. I'm a Virgo rising and Gemini sun. I'm a very judgy person. So I can get very judgmental on other people's connections. So I cannot confess to that flow of being an envious person, but I can confess to something that's maybe worse. I don't know. I'm just judgmental. So I can easily judge people for having like starseed, like Nazi decks, and playing ignorant with that. Like, you can't ignore that this is eugenist and fascists. I mean, come on. You can see the information everywhere. Or people who have many decks with a lot of cultural appropriation. When I see videos, or even my friends, sometimes I'm like, are you sure? Do you need that? Or when I see a lot of people who are not like thin people, who can be bothered if they are fat people or not in their decks, because it's not none of their problems. And I'm like, yeah, you're part of the problem, of course, because it's clearly fat phobia talking. If you can be happy only having decks with thin people, right? And same with disability and race and everything. I tend to be judgy. I try to not react on that too much, to not spend too much time overthinking that other people do things so badly. And I'm obviously very perfect, because I'm not, and my collection is not perfect. And Sometimes I fall for decks that don't match at all my ethics, so I can understand why other people don't, but yeah, I get very judgy. Even here on YouTube, I might at some point judge people for making too many collection videos or reviews or receiving a lot of decks from the publishing houses, and always be very, very enthusiastic about everything, so the lack of critical mind. Vulgarizing again is something that I'm very judgmental about. I can be terrible on that, and I'll try to work on it as well. And not, if I see that I'm minding other people's business too much, or not like looking at my own map, my own issues, and yeah, then I would look at myself in the mirror and be like, why are you doing that? And I would encourage myself to unsubscribe or direct my thoughts in any other direction, but it's difficult. It's important, let's say, for me. Who on YouTube has the best collection videos? I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. I haven't watched a lot of collection videos lately, because then I might be tempted to buy more than I ought to. I have a feeling of completion and satisfaction with my own collection. So too much inspiration is not good for me when it comes to consumerism. Yeah, I don't enjoy this kind of videos at the moment. I really like this tag, it's not a tag, but this series of videos and people responding, because as I said before, I like the reflexive aspects and people thinking about what it means to collect and things like that. I like that more than seeing more decks and people, whatever. That said, I have quite a few collection videos, like my plants decks, my mini decks, all of my decks at a certain point, or of course my queer decks and everything. So I do make a lot of those videos, but I wouldn't say, yeah, I really can't answer that question, really. Doesn't work for me. What's some advice that you would give to a future or new deck collector? Start small, try and be mindful, try and have a relationship with the decks before looking for more. I understand that sometimes it's best to have a deck to see how you interact with it. It's not the same as watching walkthroughs or reviews online, and sometimes you really need to have a deck to work with it, but don't let that overwhelm you. Don't let that make you chase the next best thing, because then it's an endless chase. My advice is always to try and learn tarot and spend time with tarot to begin with, because I can see in myself and in other people that if you go very quickly, like, oh, I need more, I need to explore, oh, I like the art in tarot is amazing, so let me get more. Sometimes it can be a way to bypass the study path, like the time that you might spend with tarot and getting to know a deck and getting to know tarot. I think that there's no need to have a plethora of deck to do that. Quite the contrary. I mean, you can always look up images online. You can see, or have even tarot books where you can see cards from many different decks as a source of inspiration. But having too many decks as inspiration might at some point just be a distraction from learning and committing to your tarot path. That said, it's okay. Some people never get to study tarot and always get to enjoy the pretty decks in their collection and enjoy the art and everything. So perfectly fine for me, perfectly okay that we all approach things in a different way. For me, it's really cool to go in depth with tarot, to get to know it, to always be learning about it. And the first thing I would say is to, yeah, have a relationship with tarot in general, with the tarot archetypes, with tarot, with the few tarot decks that you have, before rushing to have too much. That might be overwhelming, but everybody is different and there's no one way to learn and one way to appreciate tarot. Of course, I would say always check in with yourself. Try and remind yourself of your ethics and principle, because it's easy when you see lovely things, and it's so easy to order online, especially. it's easy to lose yourself and to not think of, for example, is it possible to recycle your deck? Most of them no, because they're plastic inside of the cans of lamination or something like that. And think of that. I mean, if you care for the planet, why would you have a deck? Blah blah blah. So sometimes it's just easy to check in with yourself, because the spirit of collection sometimes can make us forget what we really value. And for me, I would say something like that. Or my phone stopped recording mid-sentence because there was no space on it anymore, and I will take in that as a sign that I was just being too chatty and that it's time for me to stop here. I want to thank you for listening, especially because I know that it can be quite hard to listen to somebody with such a weird accent and defective pronunciation. So yeah, thank you for everybody still here at this stage. Time for me to probably go back to making videos in French, right? We all can all agree, I guess, that is what I do best. But every now and then I will probably come back for a video response, because I really like this format and I like this community discussions through videos. So anyway, getting really tired. See you soon, les gros bidous. Yeah, it's over, Kathu. It's time to stop. Do I look almost dead? No, there's just no light anymore. No light, no light.